Today I will hope to make you start thinking like a researcher, and all the things that that includes. But before we start, the first assignment is on Blackboard, right? So it's up there, and next week the seminars are going to start. You find the assignment when you go into Blackboard. Don't ask me what the hell Blackboard is. Find it out, ask somebody. You go into assignments, and then you see here the first assignment, and now there's a document up there. That's the assignment. The procedure for the assignment: you get the assignment from Blackboard, you complete the assignment, you write your name on it, your student number, the name of your tutor, you print it out, and you bring it with you to the seminar next week. So you are in these different seminar groups. They start next week. Show it to your tutor when you show up, and then leave the assignment with the tutor at the end of the seminar. Okay. Let's get started. First question, can you hear me? Yeah? You know, it's fascinating. I've been playing around with this, and I'm baffled by how universities can fuck this up so badly. You know, this is now my own personal bush fix. Yeah? This is sort of, you see some tape wrapped around my this microphone and stuff. Yeah? But it seems to work. Great. You know, I solved this. Yeah? How can universities fuck this up? You know, you would think this is sort of the major business that they have. All right, it's all about teaching you guys. Okay. Perfect. Two still don't hear me. Okay. But I have another question. Well, this is sort of a little quiz here right now. You know, there's not sort of something about the readings, but which country has the highest crime rate? Okay, well, you know what? With this one, it's sort of a cliffhanger. I just leave it there. I'll come back to that later on during the session. Okay. Thinking like a researcher. What does it mean? Well, some people think that being a researcher is the opposite of being creative. I don't think that is true at all. In fact, I love being in sociology because it allows me to be really creative. I can have all the different ideas. I can go and approach and study society in ways that I want. Right? The only barriers that I have are the barriers in my thoughts. And these are the barriers that you guys have as well. So we don't require huge laboratory facilities or multi-billion-dollar experiments, spaceships, satellites, or whatnot. All we need is our thinking. And all we need to start in sociology are the thoughts and the experiences that we have. The next thing is that you need, when you start thinking like a researcher, is you have to take things apart. Rip it all into pieces and look at the things in front of you. Get into the habit of ripping things apart, the work of others, rip the work of others apart, and rip your own work apart. Be curious. If there's one thing that I want you to take out of this class at the end of the term, is that you are curious about the world. That you're curious about society, and you're curious about ways to find things up, to find stuff out about the world, about the society that we are all in. Go down and dig deep. Go to the bottom of things. Be persistent and go down there. Some of the best stuff that I see in sociology is actually the things where perspective is being flipped around. And that's another thing that you guys need to do. You need to challenge the way you look at stuff. Don't be afraid to take a different view on things, flip it around. And when you look at the really good stuff, and in sociology that's clearly in the two best journals, that's kind of when you want to read good stuff, go and read the stuff published in the American Journal of Sociology and in the American Sociological Review. These are the journals where a guy like me would have to publish to get tenure at an Ivy League university. It's a very clear thing. When you look at these papers, well, they are very straightforward, they're very much to the point, but often they have this component where they flip something around. So they flip something around and look at things from a different perspective. And all of these things, I'm mentioning these things here, but I believe you guys have all that. I think we all start with that. I think that's sort of part of our human nature. We are curious about things, we want to take things apart and so on. And finally, somehow universities, especially at the undergraduate level, sometimes they try to take these things away from you. I was utterly frustrated about my undergraduate classes because it all felt like now I have to read books, now I have to learn things about a colonial perspective or an anti-colonial perspective on Ireland, things like that, which is very important. It's very important. You need to know these things, but don't let these other things slip away. Hold on to them. Especially then later on, when we are at the master's level, I see it, I painfully have to teach PhD students these things again. Keep it, hold on to them. Okay, so how do we start research? Well, it all starts with the question. The question is the most important thing to begin with. Always start with a question. Sounds trivial, but often people do it the other way around. They have an idea, they have a theory, they like that, but they don't have a question. So then what can happen, they can end up with a solution, but they don't know what the hell it means. Because they don't know what their question was. So start with a question and be very clear thinking about a question. So today I will devote most of the time on exactly that. So how do we go about finding questions? Well, there are different things, and I will come back to each one of them once at a time. Well, you can start with something that you have a personal interest in. That's absolutely fine. For example, you are a second-generation migrant in Ireland, and you want to know more about how successful is integration of migrants into Irish society in general. Absolutely fine. You better do something you're interested in, and you better do something that you're passionate about. I believe in passion and in doing the things that excites us. And I think that's something that you should do as well. I don't like boring stuff. I don't like boring research. I don't like boring people. Often I read something and I find, thinking myself, I'm so happy that I'm not doing this kind of research. Because it's incredibly boring. So do something that you are excited about. Do something that interests you. Because that can be the best motivation of all. Right? Research is a painful and sometimes a slow process, and sometimes you just want to bang your head against the wall and throw it all aboard. So you better start somewhere where you are excited about something. Well, what are the problems with being excited about stuff? Well, personal interests and experiences can cloud our judgment. Sometimes people are so much into something and have such strong opinion about things that they only see what they want to see. And I think this can be very dangerous. As an example, or a story, a few years back, I was having drinks with Duncan Watts. He's this huge guy in network science. He's one of my heroes. He was a professor at Columbia University at the time. He's now making big money with Yahoo Research. And he told me this story that, as being part of being a professor at this Ivy League University in New York, he had to read through all these research proposals that people submit to get accepted into a PhD program. And he confessed to me that he was extremely skeptical when students wrote in these proposals about their life stories, their personal experiences and whatnot. Why? Not because of a lack of motivation. All of those people were highly motivated, and that's sort of what they clearly signaled. But he was skeptical about their lack of judgment, or being objective and being able to do objective research. Remember last time I had this quote from Richard Feynman that science is the bending over backwards to prove yourself wrong. Well, that's always true, but especially when you're heavily involved in something, or when your research topic is very personal. You need to be self-critical and constantly strive for objectivity. If you don't know that, you become an instrument of yourself at best, or an instrument of somebody else at worst. Okay, so that's personal experience. That's sort of how you can start. The next thing, replication. Well, another strategy is start research and find a research question as replication. Replication is basically an attempt to address exactly the same research questions that others already had before. And others already looked at that. And you try to replicate what they did. You try to derive the same conclusions as they did. Why is it important? Well, we all make mistakes. Believe it or not, professors make mistakes. It's completely human. And we should not be afraid of discovering mistakes or having others discover our mistakes. Yeah, I think the important thing is one of those free life lessons that you get here. The important thing is to learn from your mistakes and move on, get better, and you can't do that when you don't discover that. When I don't know, that you don't hear me, I cannot remedy the problem. So replication is a strategy to discover that. We start from scratch and we try to see if we can replicate the same results. And when you are a bachelor student or even a master's or a PhD student, I think that's a great place to start. That's sort of what I recommend to people. Why? Because you have a very clear area where you're working in. Now you can be easily lost. What do I have to do? What are all the theories out there? What is all the stuff that I can do? A replication is a safe bet. It's really safe. You see there's a very clearly defined set of literature, there's a clear research question, it's important, others care about it already, it got already published and so on. Go and replicate stuff. But when we replicate things, well, first of all, we can replicate ourselves. Whenever I do some research or when I do some fancy statistical modeling, the things that I do at the weekends, sort of how my life looks like, or when I write a sort of a fancy computer model or something like that, I do it, and then I put it aside. I leave it completely aside for a week or two, depending on how long it takes for me to forget about all this stuff. And then I start completely from scratch again. The same thing, and I don't even use any documentation or any programs that I've written in the first instance. And only when I arrive at the same conclusions, then I'm happy to move on to the next stage. Right? So at least that's how I'm replicating myself. And then I go on and then I write it up, and then I'm confident in telling others about this research and writing a paper about it. This is how my stuff gets better. This is how you can get your stuff better. The other thing that we do is we replicate others. Right? So it's not just about replicating myself, but also the work of others. Why? People make mistakes. And in the academic community, what we now call replication packs are becoming more and more the norm. And I think that's a very good thing. A replication pack is basically, a free set of data, kind of a very clear outline about how you did the stuff, all the practical nitty-gritty details, the syntax, so that everybody can replicate your work. So for example, in the last 2 weeks, I was contacted by 2 students from University of Pennsylvania, and the other one, I don't know where he was from. They read my stuff, and they wanted to replicate it. So they asked me for a replication pack, which is a great thing to do. Unfortunately, I couldn't give them one because of the data access agreement that I had with the original data provider that I had, but it's becoming more and more the norm. And it's a very, as I said, it's a very good strategy, not only to expose yourself, but also to expose others. People learn from their mistakes. As a bachelor thesis, a replication project is a fantastic idea. I highly support it. It's a pretty safe bet. You start off with a very well-defined question, area, and literature. You're not lost. You clearly know what you're trying to do. And then, often when you replicate something, you discover all these things that people haven't written about in the book or they haven't written about in the article. So then you learn all these things that where they made a decision, where you think one could have made another decision as well. So oftentimes questions pop up while you're replicating stuff. So don't be afraid to be too limited. through a replication study, often it just really puts you on track to then open the horizon. What are the problems with the replication? Well, you can lose your imagination. And if you haven't noticed, for me this is important. I think this should be important for you guys as well. You can get so caught up in trying to replicate somebody else that you forget about how you would have done it in the first instance. Often when I start some new research, I read a lot. I look at what others did and I try to replicate their findings, but then again, I put it aside. I stop for a while and I pretend for a moment that I've never read anything about the topic, and then I just think about, okay, how could I approach this? Okay, so that's replication. Next one is finding a gap. Well, this is all about finding a gap in the existing research. Often when you read papers, authors list at the end all these things and all this stuff that they didn't come around doing in the paper. And sometimes they're just limited. Sometimes there's just so much stuff, one could look at this, one could look at that, but they have to focus on the one thing or the other. So reading papers, and often at the end there's sort of this limitation section or ideas for further research. All good papers have that. That's a great starting place as well. Well, you can close the gap, you find it, you pick one of these. Give an example, there's this literature about social mobility processes. You all heard about these kind of things. And more precisely, it's about the social immobility. Basically, we know for a long time already that the kind of jobs that your parents have has a dramatic impact on the kind of jobs that you will get. Sorry to break it to you, but that's how it is. We call that social mobility, or better, social immobility. Despite equal chances, in theory, everybody can study everything in the world, but despite that, people still end up in similar kind of jobs as their parents did. Well, for example, my dad, he was a teacher. Here I am, standing in front of you, telling you stuff. Well, it's sort of a different thing. I'm here at the university, but still, there are different explanations for these things. Well, first of all, you might get a better idea about what a particular job is. I had no idea what a lawyer is, because I didn't know any lawyer. Right? Or maybe you don't know anybody who's a medic. You don't know what are the tricks of the trade. How does it go? You don't know how to survive the lectures. You don't know what to do. So there are all these different things. So that's sort of a very solid body of research. People study these things for a long time. It's at the center of a lot of sociological research. It is very interesting stuff. But then, scholars came along a few years back and realized, hang on, all these processes that we're talking about here, about how social inequalities are being reproduced through the people you're being exposed to, through the family network that you have, they should matter for all of your family members, not just for your parents. Makes a lot of sense to move it one step further, right? And then people started to look at the importance of grandparents, for example. No surprise, but they found grandparents matter, right? When your grandparents were self-employed, you have a higher chance of being self-employed. When your grandparents were in the working class, you have a higher chance of ending up in the working class. So that sort of, this effect might not be as strong as the parental effect, but it's nevertheless there. But it opened up this field where then people thought, okay, well, in theory, we should look at all sorts of family relationships. Right? And this is sort of, where last year, actually right now, I'm just dealing with the R&R from the journal reviewers. I wrote a paper about that. I was in Sweden with this colleague of mine, and being a social scientist in Sweden has this advantage that you have data about everybody who ever lived in Sweden in the last 30 years. It's a little crazy, it's a little freaky, but apparently Swedish people don't seem to care about these things. So Sweden is a social researcher's paradise in that front. However, what we did, we then did a study about that. And we constructed a huge data set about family relationships. We basically mapped the entire kinship network of an entire country, and we looked at the importance of your aunts and uncles for the job that you have at the end of the day. You see, this is sort of a gap that was obviously out there. People couldn't address it for whatever reason. There was data limitations and so on. We looked at the gap, we thought, let's address it. There we are. It's a very safe bet, and it advances our knowledge quite a lot, right? It's something that we all there's a research field, there's sort of a clear research frontier. There are things that people haven't looked at. Maybe they didn't come around to do it. Maybe they had problems. Maybe the data didn't exist. Maybe the computers were not powerful enough. All those kind of things that can lead and help you to find a gap and to fill the gap. So basically, finding a gap means look at things and look at the things that are missing. Right? Can be obvious. Sometimes it cannot be obvious. Look at the stuff, find the stuff that is missing, and try to remedy that. Okay, again, sort of filling the gap. It's also that's sort of one step further after the replication. That's something that I recommend to people as well. When there's a master student or a PhD student coming, there's a clear problem, there's a clearly defined issue, people care about it, people mentioned it, go and fill the gap. Okay, so we have personal experience, replication, research gaps. The next one is you can start with a theory. And you can go about and try to test the theory. Go and test the theory. When you go and when you start with the theory and you want to test the theory, remember what I talked about the last time. We want to test stuff. We're not entirely sure, and the more tests we run, the more tests that the theory passes, the more confidence we have in this theory, right? But you need to start with something that people care about in the first instance. So I have this story, and once you knew this guy, this professor in Germany, and he did this brilliant work. That's a fantastic quasi-experimental research design where he looked at how people recycle in the city of Cologne. And he looked at it during a time when they implemented a change in how the whole recycling procedure goes. Let's say there are, recycling containers around the street, or they're being in front of the people's houses. So there was a change in how they did that, and there was a gradual change. They implemented that, they phased it in different parts of the city at different points in time. So it was a great design because it allows you in a quasi-experimental setting to compare these things with each other, right? So how does the recycling change from the one neighborhood where suddenly now there's this new recycling scheme with where the rubbish is being collected in front of people's house, or in the other case where people have to walk somewhere, right, and recycle stuff there. So he used that to test a theory. It's the so-called low-cost theory, which makes sense a little bit that people would recycle more when there are lower costs associated with it. The problem with this kind of research was, he told me I can't remember where it was, a conference or somewhere, we're sitting together, having some things, he said, Thomas, this is great. I said, this is brilliant stuff. And then he said, Thomas, but I went to a conference and nobody cared. Why? Because nobody believed in the theory in the first instance. And it was a very German thing. There are a lot of German things, especially in sociology. It's a little weird. But then, on the top of that, he basically rubbed himself against a theory that nobody cared. So what? Right? So start with something that is important. Try to, when you do that route, when you go that route, take the biggest one, take the most established one that you can find, and then rub against against that theory. And don't be afraid to not disprove it. Well, actually, that's sort of then advancement of our knowledge as well, because we can increase the confidence into the theory because it passed yet another test. Okay, so challenge the biggest one and the strongest one that you can find, because if you find evidence in support of the theory becomes even stronger, and when you find evidence against the theory, you show that something important and widely used might be wrong or not work as the way we would expect. Okay, another thing about theories. Never become the disciple of a theory. Never worship a theory. Even if you like it, you need to be the strongest critic of that theory. Even when you're in the middle of a field, I'm in this whole analytical sociology thing, you need to be the strongest critic of the thing. So I have a funny story around this. Not too long ago, I was in this PhD transfer exam, where PhD students, they have to pass the stage to move on in their life, and all of us, we are happy about it. And you sit there with colleagues, and there's the student tells you some stuff about what they are doing, and there are 3 faculty members, and here I was. So I'm new to this place, so I just arrived, I'm just getting to know my colleagues, so what do they do, and I just sit there and listen to this whole thing. And then one of my colleagues, I'm not going to tell you who it was, said that the student should think more about the theory that she wants to back and then devise a research design around that. That's what my colleague said. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. I thought, I was startled and shocked, right? At the same time, I thought, I was just new, I just didn't want to make this huge mess and start this huge fight, in front of the student with my colleague. I was just new here. My colleague said, think about a theory that you want to back. Well, I would say exactly the opposite. Think about the theory that you want to disprove. As you know, hopefully I convinced you from last time, we can never actually verify something. The only thing we can do, we can show that something is false, right? So by thinking about how you can disprove something, that's the sort of how you have to design your research. And then show me that you didn't disprove it, then I believe more in the theory. But don't start with it that you say, okay, this is sort of the theory, I love it, it's great, I love this guy, I read it, or this is my advisor or whatnot. And then you try to produce further evidence for it. I think that's sort of not scientific. It's sort of against the stuff that I told you about the last time. So it should be the exact opposite. Think about the theory you want to challenge and disprove, and then build your research design around it. As I hopefully convinced you last time, we cannot acquire knowledge by verification, falsification, at least not when using data and induction. The only thing we can be sure of is when something is wrong. You need to work as hard as you can to falsify a theory. So when you start with the theory, you need to find its kryptonite. You need to find the stuff that makes the theory crumble. And that's what your research design should be all about. And then we know if the theory passes, then I think, wow, you really produced some knowledge, right? You had sort of a reasonable idea about what could be the kryptonite of this theory, and you showed me it wasn't. Or maybe you showed it was, right? So that's sort of a very strong thing. If you show me something teeny tiny that I think, yeah, that's not a big challenge for a theory, I didn't learn very much. So find the strongest contenders, right? So you have to choose a theory, and that's another strategy you can have, which is, by the way, a very clever idea as well. You start with opposing theories. They say different things. That's sort of a clash. Then you put them to battle, let them fight, and then you come out with a winner. The good thing about that strategy is you almost always have a winner. And that means the one theory that won, we can have a higher confidence in that. We still haven't verified it, but we can have a higher confidence believing in that because this theory passed yet another test. So it's battling the theories. Okay, so another way to start your work, think about the research questions, is through social problems. So some social problems are very real, right? Sometimes they hit us like nothing before. So the whole European refugee crisis is an example of that. It's really hitting us. It's really starting. That's a real problem. People are dying, right? And I believe it is our job as social scientists to look very closely at that and try to advance our understanding of the social problem. Often, if we don't do it, nobody does it, right? So that's sort of, we need to engage with the important things in our society. Okay, this can be a real problem. Right? There's a huge crisis happening out there. I have colleagues of mine, they're sort of, not just trying to solve that at a political level, but even at a research level. There's a lot of activity happening there right now. As you can imagine, governments throw huge amounts of funding in there, but not only because of that, but also because it is an important problem to address. So now I have a lot of people that try to understand that. Right? They kind of put research teams together, research groups, international corporations, to look at how does this whole refugee crisis work, what can we do about it, what are the problems. Okay, but sometimes, these problems, this can also be about change, right? So the world is changing. The world is changing around us all the time, right? And that might challenge us. So that might give us a new area where we need to think about stuff, right? How does technology affect our life? How does it affect our interactions with each other? How does it affect the way we teach, right? All these kind of things can be important issues to look at as well, because it's sort of these societal issues that are hitting us and that we need to deal with somehow. Okay. Well, what are the problems with social problems? Sometimes it's a little hard to know where to start. So we can be very lost, especially theoretically. And there's sort of this thing: what do we do? How do we address this? Right? It's not a clear starting point. So when you are in a bachelor thesis, this kind of actually could be a difficult thing in terms of getting to the point, right? In terms of achieving something. I think it's very noble and we should do that, but sometimes maybe we just don't have the right theories yet for the new problems that describe the changes around us that we observe. So in producing these new theories, it's not an easy task. So that can be very difficult, and I think that's too much for a bachelor thesis. Furthermore, so we can go and we can change the world, but how do we know that what we think, what should be done to solve a social problem is the right thing? Sometimes distinguishing from right from wrong is simple. Like in the refugee crisis, there are people dying every day, and we should do something to prevent that. I think we should do everything that we can to help. But what if something is different? Some people, and even some of my colleagues, they say that, or they think that we should overthrow the political system, we should start a revolution, and we should just start a new society. But how do we know that this is the right? How do we know that this is the right thing to do to solve the problem that we started to solve with in the first instance? How do we know? Well, it can lead to even more problems and sometimes to even more death, right? So when we look back, sometimes people thought we need to change the world. They had these noble ideas, but it just didn't work out. So we had Bolshevism, we had fascism, and scholars had been instrumentalized for particular political ideas. I think, that's my personal opinion, I think we need to be very careful about what we recommend. And we need to be very careful about not becoming the instrument of ourselves, but also of somebody else or a particular idea. Now, I believe in this idea of objectivity, that we can objectively say, for some things that are right and wrong, and that we need to be careful about the other things where we cannot do that. Well, let's think for a moment about some other disciplines. I imagine you are in the medical community, right? So whatever scholars find there, they run the same kind of statistical analysis that I do, sometimes even more fancy models and stuff, and they want to know, is this new drug helping people? Right? Is this sort of an effective way to treat HIV/AIDS? Is this an effective way to treat the Ebola outbreak? Right? So that's kind of the stuff, and when you get into these kind of analysis, and we'll get to it later on at some point, you realize sometimes it's actually not that straightforward. It depends on the kind of model that you selected, depends on how you operationalize your variable, or some other decisions that you made during your research. Maybe you even made some mistakes, right? Or maybe you didn't make any mistakes, but you just looked at only one particular perspective. But in the medical community, then people have these findings, and then they make a recommendation, and then it's being picked up by the FDA or by some other authority, and that's sort of the new plan for treating illnesses. What if they are wrong? Lots of people might die, right? And these things happen. When I make a mistake, the worst that can happen, I don't know, most likely is that my colleagues are annoyed at me or something like that. But in other disciplines, this can have huge implications. And even in the social science, I think this can be the case as well. So as before, with the personal interest, we should be careful to not become the instrument of neither our own ideas nor those of others. Instead, try to stay, that's what I think, try to be as objective as we can. Okay. So the sixth way to approach a research and a research question is what we call a puzzle. What is a puzzle-based approach? Well, a puzzle is not just a general topic, such as the effects of gender on wage, right, which is sort of an important thing to study, but it is a correlation or an observation that defies the expectations of our common sense or the prediction of some theory. And here's a guy, Diego Gambetta, he sort of was one of my other advisors in Oxford. He's sort of this amazing scholar. And if you listen to him, and he can completely change your world, the way he looks at things, and the way he describes things, and what he sees in things. So he's a master in stuff. So he sort of tried to teach us and push forward this puzzle-based approach. And he said sort of the best ones of these puzzles are those which seem outlandish at first, but once studied closely, put our theories to the test and reveal something of unexpected importance. Right? So they kind of advance our knowledge by showing something that we didn't expect to begin with. So we have our common sense, and that's a valid mode of seeing some stuff. We use it all the time. We have our common sense. We see something around the world, or maybe we read something. You read some text and stuff, or you read some theories, you read it, but then you look at the picture and something is off. Something just doesn't fit. There's something wrong in here. That's sort of what a puzzle is. Something that startles you a little. Like, hang on a moment. How can that be? What is that? Okay, a puzzle can be theoretical, something that the literature just doesn't make sense of. Or it can be empirical, some observations where we think, how can that be? That's sort of something that just doesn't make sense. So some puzzles, they are very relevant, they're very important. Others seem more funny to begin with, but they might reveal something very important about our world and our society. So what are puzzles? Well, I brought you a whole bunch of examples, and maybe some of you get some ideas and want to study these type of things. Certainly, if you are at the stage of a bachelor thesis at some point, it might be something to think about. Why do women commit more suicide more often than men only in China? Everywhere in the world, it's the other way around. Everywhere in the world, men commit more suicide than women, except in China. I don't know. That's a puzzle. That's something that defies our observation, sort of what we see, or we even have some theories about why that is the case. And actually, there are some very good theories about why men commit more suicide than women. But why don't they apply in China? What is different there? So that's sort of a puzzle. Another very interesting puzzle that this guy, Diego Gambetta, just wrote a book about. Why are there so many Islamic terrorists with degrees in engineering and so few with degrees in Islamic studies? Half of them are engineers. Well, you could think, okay, maybe it's about blowing up stuff. And maybe just engineers tend to know how to blow stuff up. And that's why terrorist groups have demand for engineers. But when you look more closely at the data, and that's sort of what Diego did, it becomes even more puzzling. Because those own engineers in the terrorist groups, they most often have the administrative jobs. They're the bureaucrats. So that's sort of a puzzle that we see, which is a very interesting puzzle. Diego wrote this book. It's called The Engineers of Jihad, and there he showed some other startling findings. For example, that engineers in Muslim countries such as Turkey are more likely to become terrorists than engineers in Saudi Arabia. And also something that you wouldn't think. Well, here the reason is because it's possible to find good employment in Saudi Arabia, and at the time it wasn't that possible in Turkey or in other parts of the Middle East. Okay, well, another puzzle that we have is why do average IQ scores increase by 3 points every 10 years? Now that's great news. I'm telling you all these great things, but this is sort of a really good thing. You definitely are cleverer than your grandparents. There's hard evidence for that. It's hard proof, right? So we have this IQ test, and people kind of get asked all these questions, and then over a long period, over the last 100 years, people regularly have to adjust this IQ test because everybody would score so high. Even taking away all the stuff about new technology and things that you couldn't know 100 years ago. So just take the simple things, some simple, imagination problems, math problems, or vocabulary problems or whatnot, that you could have easily solved 100 years ago. People today, you guys would score much better on. Well, in fact, so it seems we are all getting more intelligent. You might say, okay, this is evolution, right? Evolution, the intelligent ones survive and strive and multiply, right? But this increase in IQ happens far too fast for evolution. This is within 1-2 generations. Evolution doesn't work that fast on that scale. So as an example, if you guys today would take the IQ test from a century ago, there would be an extraordinarily high average IQ of almost 130. So this would mean you're all super intelligent, you can all be professors, you can all have an amazing life. If in turn, the people from 100 years ago would take the today's test, and as I said, let's strip away all the stuff that they couldn't know because the world changed and the technology and things like that, they would on average score an IQ of 70. That's at the border of intellectual disability that we have nowadays. So it's sort of a huge effect, right? Actually, in the literature, this is something that psychologists often deal with. It's called the Flynn effect. There's some explanation for that. But that's sort of a puzzle. That's a puzzle. How the hell can that be? Okay, another interesting puzzle. Why does India, with 1.2 billion citizens, never win medals at the Olympics? Sorry?
That's untrue.
What?
They won boxing medals.
Well, I looked at the numbers. In Rio, they won 0 medals. They won 0 medals in Rio. When you look at the whole history of the modern Olympics, ever since they started in Paris at the beginning of the 20th century, India won 37 medals, including 9 gold medals. How many medals won Ireland? Huh? 53. Ireland won 53, and during the first 20 years there wasn't even an island. We can debate all these kind of things. But then Ireland won more medals at the Olympics than India. India has a population of 1.2 billion people. Ireland has a population of 4.5 million people. So India has 300 times as many people as Ireland. But Ireland wins more medals at the Olympics than India. So that's a puzzle. Another puzzle, why is the high rate of plastic surgeries in the world found in Iran? It's also something that you would not have guessed. Another puzzle, why do Oscar winners live longer? Seriously, this is true. There's a paper, I think it was even published in Science. Yeah. Oscar, your Academy Award, Best Actor for a movie and so on. People who won that award, they tend to live longer. Now, actually, I have this research project where I look at the same thing in the Olympics as well. So I sort of look at people winning the gold medal and other people winning the silver medal, the bronze medal, and I also find similar results. However, this research, I'm only working on this research every 4 years. It's sort of whenever the Olympics are, they're 2 weeks. I get into the Olympics, I get excited, say, let's do some research about it. I dig deep, and I go to the data set I had about the Olympics, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe at some point in the Olympics I have a final conclusion, a final result. There are explanations for this, right? There are serious explanations for this. But it's a puzzle. It startles us. Another puzzle that Jon Elster found, he's one of the big dudes that I get the jitters about when I meet him. He's now a professor in Columbia University. He's a Norwegian guy. All these honorary doctorates and whatnot. And he observed this startling fact that the most books that are stolen from Oxford libraries are theology books. Well, that's something we wouldn't have expected. So that's sort of a puzzle which might lead to something about the world that we didn't know. Sometimes puzzles don't lead to anything. You know, that's sort of something you need to be ready for. Right? There's sometimes puzzles. Maybe you can easily dissolve the puzzle, or maybe you just don't find an answer for it. But for me, you know, that's sort of very fascinating stuff. So I like to think about puzzles and trying to approach puzzles and try to solve them. Well, one other puzzle that another advisor of mine in Oxford, Michael Biggs, came up with is, why do students go to lectures? Why do students go to lectures? It's a serious question, right? Because you could read up on stuff, you could, watch something, you could talk with people. Why do people actually go to lectures, right? Okay. So how do we know about these puzzles? Well, our experiences, our common sense. We read about them, you know, it could be in the newspaper, or you read some stuff. You know, actually, I have a collection of little puzzles, so whenever you're interested in something, you attend to the lectures, you hear great things about India, about Oscar winners, or you just open your fucking eyes. Seriously, this is what sociology is all about. So when we have now a puzzle, is it really a puzzle? That's sort of the first thing that we do, establish the facts. And now let's go back to finally to our crime rate. You know, the answer is, it's the Vatican. The Vatican has the highest crime rate in the world. How can we look at this? Well, first of all, is it really a puzzle? Now you see why it's not really a puzzle. I can take this apart very easily. The Vatican, you know, with Pope and all those guys, has a population of 455 people. Now, there were almost 400 offenses, which gives you this crime rate of almost, for crime rates of 133%. In Ireland, the crime rate is 5.3. Okay, I had lots of other stuff, but we come back to that next week. But before we end, the reading for Wednesday is this one, where we'll talk more about causality and other exciting things. Thanks very much.